storm. And I don't have time to go into the geography of the sea and the crevices and the valleys and you know, there's all kind of barometric pressures and there's all kinds of things about whirlwinds and there's just all kinds of things that you could study about the sea and the water and how all of this actually came about and how it was created. But what we do know, according to the original language, this was more than just a little storm. Okay, this was something quite maybe unheard of, or this is something that even these fishermen weren't quite accustomed to. Does that make sense? This is quite a storm. So I don't know. It sounds like maybe the God of heavens, there could have been a little help to try to test them, and maybe it was just an opportunity for Jesus to remind them that they are lacking in faith. Because he says that, right? "O ye of little faith." He would say, "Why are you afraid?" And so this is what Jesus is continuing with. Their lack of faith. Their fear. And we're going to talk about phobias and fear here shortly. But just understand that this was a terrifying, frightful, and fearful storm. And it caused even these expert fishermen to be scared, to be fearful. They were frightened. And then we're going to talk about another aspect of them being frightened, but not necessarily because of the storm. So just hang in there with me. So, all three writers mentioned a word. Did you catch that word? And there was a great calm. And that's my message this morning. Staying calm. Remain calm. Be calm in the storms of your life. Now understand it, when I use the term storm, I'm not talking about that physical aspect of storm. We all understand, do we not, that when we use the term storm, we are referring to about the struggles, the pain, the trials, the adversity, and all of those adjectives that you could use to describe the storms of life. 5 observations. Number 1. The storms of life, from what I can gather and what I've seen and witnessed in the lives of God's people, and particularly in these men in their lives, it seems that the storm often invariably comes in the path of obedience. I have known some great godly people, and I have often wondered in my young life how some of these godly, holy Christian people could have nothing but heartache and pain and trial and sorrow upon sorrow upon sorrow upon sorrow. It just doesn't make sense. But you see, and for whatever reason, and I don't even begin to understand why, but that's how the storms of life often come. The storms of life often come in the path of obedience. I want you to think of Hebrews 5:8. That's a great verse, even right now at this point. The Bible says that although he was a son, yet learned he obedience by the things which he suffered. That's a great verse. Yeah, you see how relevant that verse even is, even for us. Although he was a son, although he was a son of God, although he was God, because in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Even God, Jesus, the God-man, had his storms. Storms often come in the path of our obedience. And I think Matthew 8, Mark 8, and Luke 8 make that very clear, at least to me. So, in the scene here, Jesus suggests, boys, Let's go to the other side. This is getting toward evening time. He's had a pretty hard day, as he often does. Long days. People, just thousands and thousands of people throng around him. Now, you know, as we get into phobias, and there's just literally hundreds and hundreds of phobia, people have disorders. That's just, and you know, fear of snakes, fear of spiders. People had fear of heights, and there's even theophobia. What's theos? Anybody remember what theos is? Okay, theo, God. So there's a fear of God or gods. There's a fear of theology. And that's my whole life. That's your whole life. We study theology. So there's the fear of theology. It's called theophobia. And there's just literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these phobias. And of course, anybody, you still remember, what's the number one phobia? It has been and still continues to be. The number one fear of people, what is it? Public speaking. Not everybody can, I get paid to run my mouth. That's usually what I share with people. A lot of people can't do what Tommy does. Although maybe as inadequate sometimes as he feels, but I appreciate Tommy getting up here and leading and talking and sharing, and Pup gets up here, and Harold and Jim and all these guys get up here and they speak publicly. Now, it's a lot easier just with 30-some people, but if you're up in front of 10,000, 50,000, or 100,000 people, well, that could be a little bit different, okay? There's a big difference between the size of crowds. But but phobias, and that's, and the fear, to me, was very, very clear here, and you can see it. These guys are afraid. Because that's what Jesus, why are ye fearful? Why? You're fishermen, for crying out loud. This is what you do for a living. Why are you afraid? I think it's a good question. But Jesus said, let's go, and then, of course, you know, as usual, they just never question it, and they get into the boat, and there they go. They're not the only ones, remember? The Bible makes it clear that there's other little boats, so they got people following them, as people did. They followed Jesus. And so, which is sometimes what makes this story maybe a little bit more, maybe harder to understand, just a simple fact for me that they're fishermen, and this whole scene, it just makes this difficult some to understand, and then even maybe Jesus' attitude toward them. But anyway, the storm often comes in the path of obedience. And I thought of the Apostle Paul. You know, you talk about somebody who had a lot of storms, and we don't have time to go back to 2 Corinthians chapter 11. He tells us about all the things that he suffered for the kingdom of God. And if you recall, if you go back to Acts chapter 15, and you look at the verses there, it becomes Acts chapter 9, actually. Acts chapter 9, I think it's like verses 15 and 16. Paul was told even ahead of time that, according to Ananias, that he was going to have to what? Suffer for my name's sake. And he did suffer. So you think of the Apostle Paul, and you think about, we won't do it this morning, but if you want to do it, go back to Acts chapter 27 and look at that account. Paul goes through a very similar situation, because that ship that he was on, he was heading to Rome, remember? That's where he wanted to go. And so, but prior to getting there, read about in Acts chapter 27. Look at the tempestuous seas and the wind and all the problems that thing created. But look how God was able to use Paul amidst that storm. Fierce, raging storm. I think of Paul and his storms. I think of Paul in Acts chapter 20, when he talks about how that, he talks about basic, in essence, chains and tribulations and things like that. All the things that he had to go through because Paul was on the path of obedience. And that happens. If you're being godly and holy and faithful, you are going to suffer. The Bible makes that clear. We just came through a series on the book of Job, Look at that man and his suffering. But what was his attitude? Remember, even though God tests